So what we're going to do now is Saimi is going to be playing the role of the breather, and I'm going to be playing the role of the facilitator. And during in-person sessions, there's two possible situations where you might do what we call neurodynamic release work on a breather. The first is during the session, and for instance, sometimes people will call you over and say, oh, I've got this tension in my shoulder that just won't go away, even if I'm breathing. So they want some support, and you would give it to them. And the second time is at the end of the session when you're checking them out. You would always ask them, how does your body feel? Is there any tension in your body? And at that point, if they say there's a residual tension, you can also do it at that time before you let them go and either go to their meal break or drawing or whatever it is they're going to be doing next. And there's different techniques that you can use on various parts of the body. And not all of them can be demonstrated with just two people. so this is really like a partial bodywork thing. And in the in-person session, we're going to be showing other techniques and different ways of doing it and get into much more depth in it. But since you are going to be doing at least one-on-one sessions, possibly, we want to at least give you a framework of how to work with people to relieve these tensions. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through each body part and just demonstrate how the technique works. And the basic concept is always that you want to support the body in maximizing the tension so it then releases. And there's different ways to do that in various parts of the body. So we're going to go through a demonstration.
Well, Michael, the first principle is always safety is always first.
Correct.
That's a critical rule number one.
Why don't you go ahead and amplify on that?
Yeah, just you don't ever want to do something that is risky. And at some points, as they're demonstrating, there's a few places where if somebody starts really rocking and moving around a lot and really maybe accessing deep anger, there's some safe ways to work with that, and there's some unsafe ways to work with that. So we'll kind of talk about that when you get there. But you always want to, it's extremely important. Head, you always protect the head. That's always the first and foremost rule of safety, because it's the most dangerous spot, especially if you're in a workshop floor, if it's not padded, but if they're moving around a lot, the head has to be protected. It's really good to have lots of pillows. I would say having a number of pillows is a prerequisite to do in person in case bodywork. If case bodywork comes up, at least 3 or 4 good sized floor pillows I'd highly recommend. And a pad, maybe even a pad for them to lie on potentially. But we'll bring up safety stuff as we go along, I think. But just that's always first. Oh, and I guess one more thing. The other thing is, it's the only thing pretty much that you will ever disturb a breather's process for is for a safety issue. So that's it doesn't happen very often. I probably had to do it twice in 18 years. But if somebody is doing something that could be harmful, you might have to actually tap, that's the one time you might intervene. So back to you.
Okay, all right, so let's just get started. So we're going to start with one of the more complicated ones, and that is the neck. And the neck is complicated just because obviously, that's where you breathe through, and putting pressure against the neck obviously is not something that you want to do. So there's particular ways to work with that, and there's generally in this particular part that we're doing, where it's the front of the neck, it's going to be with a situation that we call choking. And what you might find is sometimes that breathers, as you can see Saimi's doing, like you might be watching them and they might actually start like putting their hands on their neck and looking like they're either partially choking themselves or whatever during the session. And when that happens, you want to go over to them and do an intervention so they can release the energy that they're trying to release in a safe manner. And so, for instance, let's say someone's having an experience of they feel like they're in a past life and they're drowning, where they can't breathe. So, they may just spontaneously put their hands up to their neck. So in that situation, you would go over to the breather and address them. And like in this case, I would just say, "Oh, hi, Simon.
Yes.
How are you doing?"
I feel like there's a pressure, and I just want to release this, but it's like around here, it's so tight, and I just want to release. I want to release it.
Okay, is it okay if we try something where you can safely release it, so your hands aren't on your neck like that? Are you
Okay.
willing to try it?
All right.
Okay, great. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to use a towel, and I'm going to be taking the towel and putting it, so let's take your hands off your neck first, and I'm going to be putting it across your upper chest and holding it, and then put both of your hands on the towel. And what I want you to do is, you can either leave the towel just barely touching your chest or even close to your neck, but just not pushing down on it.
Yeah.
And then just twist the towel, and at the same time that you're twisting the towel, just visualize the energy releasing that you were trying to release through putting your hands on your neck.
Okay.
And also, it can be incredibly helpful to make sounds to support the release.
Okay.
And I'm going to hold the towel so you don't actually push down on your neck.
Okay.
That's it. That's it. Stay with it. Stay with it. That's it. Perfect. If you need to cough, just cough. Okay. Just relax for a moment. And how does that feel now?
Good. It's chunk of them got released. I feel.
Great.
Yes, it freed me. Freed my neck better.
Okay, so that's the basic technique, and you may have to do it once or twice if they say that it's partially gone and they need more release. And the critical thing is when you're holding the towel, make sure that they don't push it down onto their neck, with the towel. It can touch their neck, but you don't want them to put any pressure on their neck. So you're kind of holding it up, so to speak.
So I might inject a few things.
Yeah, go ahead.
So there's also a few things sort of on a meta level that are going on here that I just want to point out, and you can kind of keep an eye on it as we go on. The first thing is he asks permission. Body work or release work, whatever, you always interact with the person first. You don't ever just go in and do this kind of thing. So he checked in with her, and then he said, "How are you feeling? Would you like to work with this?" You give them the option to do it, because they have to decide that they want to. And the second thing is, a lot of times, you might have noticed that Michael is giving her some words of encouragement. You don't want to talk. You want to keep the talking to a minimum. But there's certain little phrases that we use all the time in body work just to validate, because they need to be validated that what they're doing is right, because it's so foreign to them. They're not used to this. So Michael is saying, that's it. A lot of time, I'm just going to throw out some other phrases that we use a lot, and you'll probably hear Michael use some of these as we go through this. But you're doing great. You're doing great. Just validating them. Stay with it. Just to encourage them to keep, people will not go too deep unless you encourage them. So you really want to encourage them. The way passes always through. Stay with it. And also another good one is don't hold back. Really, really go for it. Like encouraging them. That's the fastest path to release and healing. When the deep, as Stan says, there's a quote of his that like something releases only when you hit the core bottom of it, kind of like the rock bottom idea in AA. And lastly, actually, you forgot one thing, Michael, on this particular, you guys, in this particular one, the throat, and I've dealt with a lot of this personally in my own process. It often brings up coughing and phlegm release, and you always want to have a plastic bag in the vicinity. Yeah. So the person may need to spit, just like they might suddenly need to sit up and spit into the bag and just release something. Literally, this will at times bring up physical release, literally from the throat and the chest area. So I have a really powerful story. So Sammy, yeah, go for it.
Yes. So for a lot of people, making sound is a really new thing for them. So when anybody, it's going to be lead to a great energy release, by voicing it out and making sound. So whoever was just kind of quietly squeezing the towel, and then first time somebody utters sound like oh, then you can encourage it. That's it. That's it. And that really encourages breathers to make sounds.
Yeah, I agree completely. And somebody's asking, do you encourage them to keep breathing in the process? If you have anything else to say on that, Michael, but I would say you do. I mean, the breath, a lot of times, you'll see this as we go through it, but you use the breath to build up the energy. Now, it's a little harder with the throat area, right? So, but you'll see it more as they go through other parts of the body. But you have them start with the breath, and you just tell them you want to go as deeply into this as you possibly can, because that's the way past it. That's the way to release it. And the more deep you can go, the better, the deeper the release. And so, really, I encourage you to go for this, and then basically, yeah. Sorry, I got distracted with something, but Michael, anything else on that?
Just that once you interact with a person, you may have to talk to them for 10 or 20, 30 seconds at the beginning when you're asking permission and stuff. Many times it can be very helpful before you start, just to have them breathe just for 15, 20 seconds first to kind of put themselves back in a little bit. So just to, kind of close their eyes, take a few breaths, and just let them breathe for a short bit of time before you actually start with anything. Just to kind of put them back in the space. Because when they come out and you're interacting a little bit, it does kind of put them a little bit into their thinking mind. So you want to just allow them to, just a very short period of time, to go back into the breathwork space and then start with
it. Right. And also, least invasive place to touch when you want to interrupt someone's home, might be harming themselves physically. Then in order to interrupt that person breather, the least invasive place to touch is shoulder. So you can gently touch it. Hey, Saimi, hey, can I support you? And instead of just, talk to the person, gently, when you want to interrupt that certain movement, you can just gently approach and touch. Hey, this is Michael. How you doing? Can I assist you? Yeah.
That's a great point, Saimi. In fact, a question had just come up about that. In fact, I think it'd be great if you demonstrate a little bit how to approach somebody when they're in the non-honorary state, Michael. Just like, because you want to absolutely channel your most yin, gentle possible energy when you're moving in. You don't just jump in there and lie down beside the person. You kind of gently, slowly move in. You don't, because some people are really sensitive. They'll feel you even if, so you just want to come in very slowly. And when you first, if they're in a deep process, when I would first reach out to them, I gently, very slowly put my hand on their shoulder and say, hey, this is Glenn. I notice you've got this going on. There's some body work or there's some release work we could do with you to help you with this.
And there's two types of situations. One is if there's really a safety situation where you have to kind of move more quickly, then you won't necessarily be able to do the ideal situation. But in most of the situations, it won't be safety. It'll just be where either they call you over, or you can see that they're doing something that needs to shift or something like that. And in that case, you want to really come in very slowly and very gently. Like for instance, if you're 20 feet away, you don't want to run across the room. You know, let's say you're in a room with like 5 or 6 people. You want to just walk very slowly and gently, and and when you come up to the person, I can't really demonstrate it exactly here, but you're coming up, you're just coming very slowly, and then you just come up to them, and you would just like kind of sit beside them, and just be with them for a second. You know, don't say anything. Just kind of, you know, allow them to feel your energy very gently, and just kind of stay and just observe for maybe a minute, minute and a half, or whatever. And then after that, then if you needed to get their attention, like Simon said, you just very gently put your hand on their shoulder and then say something like, yes, Simon, it's me, Michael.
Oh.
You know, can I support you? Or, you know, or whatever is appropriate to say at that point, and speak very softly. You know, don't, hey, Michael, hey, it's me, Michael. What's happening here? You know, so you want to, you know, they're in a very sensitive space. You want to come in very gently. You want to just sit there, be a very gentle presence, and then even when you connect with them through touch or through sound, just be like you're speaking to like a 6-year-old child. You know, like it's just in a very gentle, soft, kind of caring tone, and so that'll allow them to come out without being jarred and to, you know, be in a and to feel in a safe space. Did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah. There's another really important piece here, which is that I'm going to just guesstimate that 80% of release work happens after you're checking in with them at the end of the session. Like, or it's because they raise their hand and ask for help. So it's pretty darn rare that we jump in and offer something. It's a rare thing. So what we're showing you is doesn't happen that often. Usually people will raise their hand and ask for help on because there's a pain and they don't know what to do with it. Or when you're checking in to check them out at the end, if they have residual tension, then you work with them at that point. Does that all make sense? Like you don't really do what we're talking about too often.
Right. Yeah. This is more of like, obviously, you know, the reason we did it like this, because if someone starts to choke themselves, you have to do something. Like you can't wait for them to ask for your support. So in that type of a situation, you go in very gently and put your hand on their shoulder like we're talking about. But as Glenn said, there's 2 types of, either during the session or after the session. You know, 98% of the time you'll be coming over as a result of a request from the breather. Either during the session or afterwards, you specifically ask them, is there any place that there's still any tension left in your body? And let them scan their body and really check in, you know, for themselves afterwards. Because if sometimes they don't even realize it, because they're just coming out, they're just kind of, oh, that was great, or whatever. And they don't really take the time to really check in with themselves and see where their body's at. So that's, you always, when you check out a person, you always ask them, how does your body feel? And just give them a couple seconds to close their eyes and really check in with themselves and see what's going on. And then if they say, oh, you know what, everything's great, but I still feel, you know, a little bit of tension in my shoulder here that wasn't there before the session, then you ask permission and say, well, you know, there's a technique that we can use to support you in releasing that. Would you be willing to give it a try? You know, they virtually always say yes, but you still have to ask. This is all about self-empowerment. They control the process. It's really important. This is more of a situation where people actually are choking where they feel like they can't breathe, or they actually have their hands around their neck. So it's more of a safety thing.
Some people might go really deep inside, and then implicit memory, that umbilical cord was wrapped around when they're in a birthing process. And some people remember that, you know, body remember that to release it. And then, you know, sometimes the people have that kind of sensation around their necks for releasing.
I mean, I've dealt with this a lot myself. There's another really key factor we haven't shared yet, in that in-person workshops, part of you set a contract with the breather. And so one of the part of the contract is the word stop. At any point, this is a really critical part of interacting with people in release work. If they ever don't want they want you to stop, they just say the word stop. That's like the safe word. If they say, we always joke, if they say, oh my God, get the fuck off me, you're killing me, we're like, you're doing great, stay with it, you're doing wonderful process. But if they say stop, you stop immediately. Because that all makes sense. So in person, you definitely want to remember to talk about that safe word if in case there's anything you're going to interact with them in person. You know, and just remember, you all, this was supposed to be done in a week in person where we're all together. It's so much easier to teach this stuff when we're all sitting in a circle and watching this, and you can see the whole process very clearly. We're just trying, this is us trying to support you to know some basic techniques. So if there's something you're not comfortable with or you have questions about, we can follow up with it, but you're really going to learn this much better when we are all together in person.
Yeah, you want to say as few words as possible. You don't want to get into long conversations if you don't have to. So, but sometimes you do have to talk to see what's going on, or to just you know, when you first address them. But you don't want to ideally have these long conversations.
Right, because you don't want breathers to start talking intellectually, analytically. So facilitators can ask questions like, you know, breathers can answer yes or no, or very simple couple words. And that's what we facilitator have to choose words or sentence to make a question. So they don't have to use their brain in a normal way. So
Yeah, for sure. I mean, but again, it is different though at the end when you're checking them out. That's when you do want to get their left brain engaged a little bit to help them come out.
right. Yeah, when they come out, sometimes some people say, you know, they have a difficult time asking for help, you know, in a normal, you know, everyday. That's their habitual way of holding themselves. So sometimes people say, I'm okay. I'm okay. How are you doing? I think it's good. But then clearly eyes are glaring. You know, emotions are still like welling up. And then I'm okay. I think I'm okay. And so then in that case, without asking too many questions, you can just sit right next to the breather. And then just to keep breathing, the same pace, breathing, breathing. Just to, let's sit there a little bit more. And like, okay, you don't have to say anything. We can just sit here for a while. And you can just really see, and then just sense the energy of the breather. And then finally, you know, she or he breather might come to land on a certain place to start talking. And then, you know, you can see if it's clearly she is or he is still in the process of, you know, something is welling up. And then you can say, you know, would you like to go back on, just lay down again and breathe, close your eyes and then scan your body one more time, just to gently, just to breathe and see what's happening in your body. And you can just bring your breather back to breathe a little bit more and scan what's really happening. So
because ultimately we want them to leave the session feeling like they left whatever came up in the session, they leave it on the mat. You know, so go ahead, Michael.
I was just going to say, in an online session, you know, we always tell people just to keep themselves safe. And ultimately, in a situation like if they do start really choking where they really feel like they can't breathe, they'll just stop. But, you know, so you don't have the same option as working them through it, like in an in-person session, but they will stop and pull back if they feel like it's getting unsafe and they really can't breathe and they're starting to go into that space. So obviously, you know, they're not going to do damage to themselves in an online session just because they don't have the level of support to push themselves through. They'll stop, but it's just something that you obviously don't have the ability to work with them through in an online session where you're doing it in person. So it's really not so much a safety issue. It's an issue of allowing them to process through it with you there in an in-person session, which you don't have the option of doing in an online session.
Yeah, there's one more question. Lori asks, can we see an example of what Michael might say after the release is finished to get her back into process?
Sure. So after, and this is true of any type of body work. So after you finish with the body work and the person says, oh yeah, I feel great now, or yeah, thank you so much, that was a release, then basically all I would say is, okay, that's awesome. Now just, close your eyes back and just put your attention back on the breath and just go back into your process. There may be other things that need to process. Very simple. And then stay with them. And if they're having a tough time getting back into it, you might just sit there for a minute or two to make sure that they're okay, or they might come back after 30 seconds and they say, oh, I'm having a hard time with this. And then, for instance, you might say, okay, put your hands on your belly, just breathe into my hand. That's it. Just stay with it. And then just stay there with them for maybe 5 minutes and just keep your hand there. And let them have the little bit of pressure so they can focus on something, on your hand in this case. And then just wait till you're really clear that they're okay, they're back in their process, and then gently, very slowly take your hand off, very slowly, and just go. So you want to kind of stay with them for a few minutes afterwards to make sure that they've, successfully gone back into the process.
See, we do have another question from Leo. Have you ever intervened due to safety and the breather tried to block your intervention?
No, it's never happened.
It can't happen. You can't allow it to happen.
Well,
It's the one place where you're in a facilitator mode. You have to set a rock boundary. We can't have people injuring themselves in the workshop.
well,
And we tell them that up front. It's part of that intro. Just, remember, we gave you the list of things we talk about, and when you're doing in person, you add additional things when you up front, and you tell them the one place we will intervene immediately is safety, and they know up front that that's the case. But it doesn't happen that often. Well, it depends. Sometimes it does.
So I've never had someone fight with me on a safety thing ever.
Yeah, no, I haven't either.
So, because you set the boundary ahead of time, they understand what it is, and they just follow instructions at that point. It's happened 100% of the time. So.
And plus, they are blindfolded, so it's really limit their mobility and the senses, how they want to destroy themselves. So usually they are okay following our guidance.
Okay, I think we're ready to go. Oh, Leah, was that a follow-up? Okay, you're good. All right, so let's move to the next body part.
Okay.
A lot of that was just the basics. We kind of need to get it out to you guys. So hopefully you'll see the same principles applying in many different situations.
Okay, so we're just going to go kind of from the top of the body down. So next we're going to deal with the head and neck. And so in general, like if it's a body part like a head or neck or something, the first important thing is to find out exactly where the issue is. Because if they just say my neck has tension, that could be anywhere. It could be on the side of their neck, the front of their neck, the back of their neck, the same thing with their head. They say, I've got a headache. You don't know whether it's here or up here. So you have to get a very clear idea of exactly where the tension is so you can work with it in that exact spot. And so again, I'm not going to go through this process each time, but each time you would come up to them and normally they'd be asking for help. And even if they ask for help, they put their hand up or whatever, you walk over, like you don't run across the room, like you walk very gently because other people are also breathing, and you come in very slowly and gently and then ask, what can I do for you? So I'm not going to keep doing that each time, but you want to follow that principle each time. So in this case, we're going to start with, what's the head? Okay. So we're going to start with the head. So let's say I come over and then I ask Sammy, what's going on, and then she'll say,
I have a headache. I have a headache.
Okay, where exactly is the tension of this head?
Like here.
Okay. There is a technique that we can use of release work to support you releasing the energy there? Would you be willing to give it a try?
Yes.
So you always ask that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, and then you explain what you're going to do, basically. So I'm going to say, I would normally say this softly. I'm going to say it louder so you guys can hear it. But so basically what I would tell her is that I'm going to put my hand up against the place where it's tense. And then what I would ask her to do is I'm just going to meet her tension, pressure. I'm not going to push. I'm just going to meet her pressure, basically, just to push against my hand. And at the same time, if it feels right to let out a sound, that it's very effective to let out a sound to release the tension. And to go as long as they can, and then just let it go. So then I would, so let's say it's right here. I would put my hand up here, let's say, and then, so I would just tell her, okay, so now Simon, just, just push against my hand. And at the same time, if it feels right, release through sound and just hold pressure as long as you can, just a bit of pressure. Okay. And then after they do it, just give them a couple seconds, a few seconds, just to kind of relax. You don't hit them up right away. So maybe 10, 15 seconds, and then say, so how does that feel now, Simon?
It's much better.
Okay.
They're still there.
Okay. Would you be willing to try it one more time?
Yes.
Okay. Same thing, just when you're ready.
Good.
Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, so just now restart with the breath. And it may take you a few minutes, but just maybe you want to restart with the original technique we started with, and then just let your body take over. And then you would sit with them for a few minutes just to basically make sure that they were okay. And again, you don't want to create pressure yourself. You're just meeting their pressure. That's really important. So it's not your job to push against them. You're just basically holding them in place and just meeting their pressure exactly.
Yeah, I was just going to say something that's a really important point, because it's a misnomer to call this body work. That's why we always are hesitating to use that, because in body work, it's assuming you're going to go do something to their body. This is release work, where this is all based on the principles of empowerment. Like Michael isn't there to fix her headache. Michael is there to create resistance for her to press into, so that she can press as hard as she's wanting to, or as much as she wants to, or as little. And he just meets that with the equal pressure. Because I just can't, I just want to say that when I first started doing workshops in 2002, and I was new to this work, I was, as much as I learned all the bodywork techniques, it was a scary thing. Like I didn't have the trust that I knew, am I going to know what to do? Is this really going to help? Am I going to make it worse? But I have to tell you, man, these bodywork techniques, they've emerged out of Stan's Groff's, 50 years plus, 60 almost, of working with people in psychedelic states and other states. These come out of his, observations of what works and what doesn't, and the original techniques. And I was always blown away at how, it's just like we always tell you, trust the IGI, trust the F facilitator IGI. It's the same principle with breathwork. Trust the release techniques. They really do work. I've been blown away at times when I think and how much people find that it is valuable and helpful.
And Glenn's calling it bodywork right now, because that's how, when we originally did it in holotropic breathwork, they called it that, but we don't call it that. We call it release work or neurodynamic release work. It's because, again, what Glenn said, when people think of body work, they think of massage, where you're actually pushing on them and doing something. So it really gives them the wrong idea of what's going to happen. So we ask that you refer to it as release work or neurodynamic release work, one of those two, and not refer to it as body work. Okay, so then, like another example of a head is if it hurts you on the top of the head. So Let's check out that one. Okay, so she's just told me now that it's on the top of her head. So
Here.
okay, so I'm going to push it here, and then I'm going to ask her to push into my hand, but also to not bend her knees and push with her feet. So she's just going to basically use her body to push up, because otherwise it's very difficult for the breather to gauge when you're using your whole body to push up what the appropriate amount of pressure is to do. So I would ask her just, again, take a few breaths, just put yourself back in the process. And if it feels right, let out a sound and push. Hold it as long as you can.
Again, he's meeting her pressure. If she presses harder, he presses back.
I'm just meeting like doing an equal opposing opposite force, but I'm not like pushing like that. It's really important.
You have to be very, very, very present and follow their energy. If they press harder, you give them more. The second they stop pressing harder, you want to pull back your pressure.
And the other thing is, if you don't do it like that and you're actually pushing yourself, you can actually hurt them, because they know what they need to do in terms of pressure. So if you add additional pressure, it can actually be a negative thing. So you want to be very careful. Just meet their pressure. And also, you'll see that after this body work, many times emotions get released in the body work. I've seen it thousands of times. And if it does, then you just stop for a while and just let the emotion come out. Just be with them. Don't tell them go back to the breath. Just be with them while the emotion's releasing. And let them get to a place where you feel like that's kind of subsided, and then go back and say, how do you feel now? And then make a decision. If they still feel tension, you can do it again, or just send them back into the breath.
Yeah, that's a great point, Michael. It very frequently does end in emotional release. It's a quite typical thing. And depending upon your contract with the breather and how you feel, sometimes if they're in that place of emotional release, just a hand on their shoulder could be really helpful if you're sure that it's agreed upon and understood that that's okay.
Can I mention one experience that I witnessed when I was apprenticing Michael's workshop? There was a woman asking me. Her sitter asked me for Advil for her breather. So I run to Glenn, and there's somebody having headache, and she wants to have a Advil. And then Glenn went over to her, and then she said she has a headache here. So, and then Glenn just said, is it okay to put my hand over there and then you can breathe through? And when he put finger here and she started breathing, she was like, whole emotion, grief came up. And then she was sobbing for the next 20 minutes. And I saw Glenn kept his finger there, but somehow for her, this was very comforting. And this pressure gave her permission to go and release, really experience welcoming or just accepting, admitting all the griefs and sadness. And actually, it was anger towards her ex-husband. She went through a divorce. So it all flooded up. And but this just the pressure here was really gave her permission to go deep. So it was amazing to witness.
Yeah, in certain areas, like for instance on the head, where they can't really put too much pressure on you, and if they say it's a specific spot, you can use a finger, but you just want to be careful not to hurt yourself, because obviously your finger is more delicate than your palm or something. So if it's an area where they can really push hard, it may not be appropriate just for your own safety. Ben, did you want to make any comment, or should we move forward?
No, I think that's good.
Yeah. And sometimes like a head and other places, emotions started coming up, give a pressure here, and then breather started, feeling the emotion coming up, started crying or yelling and expressing anger, And then it is sometimes it's comforting to keep the hand on a certain place. And then sometimes the breather will just to give you a go. Oh, I'm okay. Or like, nod. And then you can just leave your hands. Yeah. It's interesting how this body, knows how to do it. Usually they say, nod, I'm okay, you can go. Breather usually give us a go. Leave me alone sign.
Yeah, that's great. I do actually. I will. I've had for me personally, this upper head area has often been a very sensitive area, and there's another technique or two that we'll have to share in person that relate to working with that area, but it would be too hard to try to ask you guys to figure this out without having in-person process with it. So yeah, we're just trying to give you the basics for now.
Okay, so on the, are you done? I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so then on the neck, there's also a possibility that they have some tension like on the back or the side of the neck. And you would basically just like if say for instance, if someone said it was on the back of the neck, I would just have them kind of turn over. It's just easier to work with. And then ask them where it is. What? Yeah, and also it's nice if they have a pillow under their head so they can rest their forehead and be comfortable. And then, so let's say she had said, okay, I've got a pressure right here in the back of the neck. And then you could either put a couple fingers there, or depending on how big the spot is, and same thing, have them push into your hand and make sound.
And not using arms, so
Yeah.
it might be hard to breathe, but this. Oh,
Okay. Anyway, that's the basic idea. Every person has a medical form, so some people have different issues. So you have to know everybody's situation. Like for instance, at the beginning of the session, you will have them tell their sitter or you, if there's no sitters, what are things, certain areas of their body that are either delicate or, their medical form, you see something. So there's certain people where you have to stay away from certain parts of their body and you can't do any body work no matter what, just because they have some kind of physical issue. So if they do have that kind of a thing, you just have to figure out another way to deal with it, either energetically or something like that. So if they have any type of physical issue with their back or with their neck, you don't want to mess with it, basically.
Recent surgeries.
Yeah. So you do want to make sure that they're completely healthy and they don't have any issues before you do any work on those areas. And it's really important, and this is like an important way in the other thing where I said don't put too much pressure on it. Well, you also don't want to put not enough pressure because then they're going to start bending their neck backwards, which is not good either. So it's important just to meet it exactly. Don't push too hard where you're forcing them this direction, and don't let them push this direction either. So it's just an exact meeting of the amount of tension and pressure that they put against you. They're doing the work. You're just kind of holding it in place and meeting the pressure.
Sometimes when they're doing the release work and they're building and intensifying and letting their vocalizations out, sometimes their body starts shaking or their feet start kicking or they start writhing a little bit. And that's that's why it's valuable to have pillows in the vicinity, just to if they move off the mat or something, and it's a lot easier to support somebody, to keep them safe from that type of movement if they're on their back.
Okay, so the next thing is the face, and there's different areas of the face that could have tension, and the most common are the jaw area and the forehead. Those are the two most common things. Sometimes people will feel like tetany in their lips. That can happen, which is more just of a numbness, which is a different kind of thing. But in terms of tension, those are the two most common areas. And so with the jaw, it can be incredibly powerful just to allow them to release that. And many times people get tension in their jaw if they have an issue with self-expression in their lives. So they carry some tension up here. And the technique to use on the jaw is, what you want to do is you want to find the area where the jaw connects to the skull here, where like when they open and close the jaw, like that's where it moves. And then you want to put your hands there. You can move your jaw for a sec so I can figure out where it is. Like it could be around here, and then have them basically. And I'm going to take my hands away so you can see what Simon's doing. But basically, have them move their jaw, not just open and close it, but like move it left and right. You know, while you're holding here, and release sound, and that can be an amazing release. I've seen it so many times.
Yeah, and one other suggestion with this is you ask the person to help you show you where the most intense pain is. You want to find the most intense point. And so you might engage the breather and ask them, so show me, put my fingers where you feel it the most, or something like that.
Okay, and then with the, like for instance, with the forehead, you can use the same technique where you just like see where it is. I mean, this is kind of part of the head in a sense, and you either use this or one point if it's one point, and have them put pressure. Those are the two most common areas in the face where there's issues. I don't think I've ever seen someone say where they have tension in the tip of their nose or something like that. But, all right, so let's go to shoulders. And so there's two areas. One is, it could be like the front or back of the shoulders. So we can just, and with the front, it's exactly the same technique where you ask them where it is. You would put your hand on it, you know, have them breathe and then push up against you, hold the tension. Like that. And then if it's the top of the shoulder, you could just go behind them. You know, put your hands on their, and then just put your hands up on your shoulders. And again, make sure when they push up that they don't use their feet. Like you keep their feet flat and just use their body to push up against your hand. Yeah, or if it's in both, you can do it with both. So you can do it just like this. Right,
Michael, you should. I think it'd be good if you just do the encouragement words too, a little bit as you go.
Okay. Right.
Just to keep demonstrating that.
Okay, so next we have the upper chest and the heart, and the tricky part about this area is that it's incredibly important that if you're working with a woman, that you stay away from her breasts. Like you really have to be like almost overly sure that there's going to be no sexual overtones or anything like that. So you have to work with it in a way where you don't like touch in that area. So see, this is the one where we do the thing we're going to sit up. Right? Okay. So basically, some people do have like tension that's created in their chest, especially, and it's just seemed to me for most people afterwards, they say it's a question of opening their heart to life or being more vulnerable, that type of thing. And so they do get this kind of feeling of tension in the chest. And again, probably most of the time it's after the session where they feel like, oh, I still got like a bit of tension in my chest area here. You know, and then again, you say, are you willing to try something and do some work with it? And one of the most effective techniques you can use, and there's one way you can do this where you have more than one person, where you have a helper. And there's another way you can do it where you're just by yourself. So if you have a helper, what you would do, and you just have to imagine another person being on the other side, and we'll demonstrate this more clearly in the in-person session. But what you would have them do is put their hands like this, you ask them to cross their hands, and then you would hold one wrist and the other person would be sitting here and holding their other wrist. And then what you want them to do is create this thing of like pulling, like expanding the chest, expanding the energy. So
pull this
yeah,
way.
yes, so they're pulling this way, trying to pull apart, but you don't let them. It's just energetically like their body's like opening up. So I would hold like this, and you don't hold their hands because that's gonna hurt them when you pull like that. You have to be on their wrists. And so you'd sit like this, and the other person would be on the other side holding, and you hold them in place. You don't let them move. And then you ask them to pull, but like they're trying to pull sideways and make sound. So that's if you have two people. But there's also a technique you can use if you have one person. And that's what we're going to show you right now. So you would have them sit up, and you're going to be behind them. And again, anytime, you don't want to ever have, like if you're a guy, your sexual area up against a woman, so you always use a pillow in this kind of a situation. But you want to give them some back support. And then what you do is you can hold their hands like this. So it's in essence the same kind of thing. And it's the same thing where you'd say, okay, Saimi, just in a moment, what I'm going to have you do is just close your eyes and take a few deep breaths. And just when you're ready, just pull both of your hands like you're trying to pull them off to the side and let out a sound. And they release a tremendous amount of energy through that. Now, the one caution in that is, if you're like a smaller person and you've got like a big guy or something like that, you may not be able to do that because they can pull hard when they do that. Even when you have two people, one with each hand, sometimes it's hard not to get pulled across. So you want to be a little bit sensitive to that. If you're on your own and you're working with someone who's a lot stronger or bigger than you are, that may not work. Ben, do you have any comment?
I don't think so. No.
Any questions or in the chat?
No new questions.
Okay, great.
Yeah, it as a breather, it makes a huge difference when there's a space. I don't have a back support. It's kind of scary and painful. But when you really use your whole body to support breather's back, it gives the breather so much like a freedom to just to go for it, to have a back support. It makes a big difference. So just use your body to support your breather's back when you do this breath work, release work.
And I guess, I would just add a note on timing. Sometimes it'll clear up as fast as it looks when Michael and Sammy are demonstrating. You just do one little wave cycle of doing the release work, and they feel like they're complete. But other times you kind of do it in waves. Sometimes you might be working with somebody for a half hour, just very slowly, one wave at a time with lots of space in between, and always at their control of what they want to do or not want to do.
Yes, that's true. So you really have to see where the breather's energy is moving. I've seen breathers did this, and then she started sobbing and crying. So in that case, me and her sitter was, holding her wrists, and for 5 minutes when she started sobbing. So she was sobbing like this, and the two people are supporting her space and holding her wrist this way, and she sobbed for 5 minutes, and then she was like, I want to do it again. So she did it again, and more cry came out. So her body just learned how to release. This is a good place and then space to release. So we were there for 25 minutes to support her big process of releasing there, but we didn't let go of her arms at that time. And then she was fully supported and went through this amazing releasing process. So just because she did it once, you just, you don't leave their body this way, especially when their emotions started coming you stay there as where you are. And if you're touching his shoulder and this emotion started coming, you just keep your hand on her shoulder or your breather's shoulder until your breather gives you some type of signal. She wants to go or again, or she's, I'm fine. And then you can just move on.
And in the in-person session in September, we're going to give you chances to actually practice this on people, which is obviously it's much more effective than just kind of watching. So.
And there's a question, Lori has a question. How about the armpit or crook of the arm tension? That area can hold tension and it's part of the lymphatic system.
Or she was like here or there.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Well, if yeah, we're going to get to the arms later, actually. Yeah, and we'll talk about that when we talk about. But if it's in the armpit, you could use exactly the same technique where you hold and they push against it and you put up pressure. And we'll talk about the arms.
And one more question from Dominique on this. So if the release work for the chest doesn't work for a smaller person on a bigger person, is there an alternative to release the chest for that person?
Glenn, you want to comment?
Well, just the regular process of breathing into it and trying to intensify it just through the breath. And, we always tell people the way passes through and just encourage them to really surrender to what they're feeling. The other thing is, in certain circumstances, sometimes if it's a safe situation and contract allows for it, you sometimes can put like a palm or fingers over the heart itself in that region and just do the same thing, the same body work. But that's a little trickier. I think we're going to get more into that when we're in person.
And one other technique you can try is, but again, if the person's a lot bigger for you, this may not work either, is that you can basically hug them, and if necessary, put a pillow between you, obviously, and then let them squeeze you with their hands like that. And that is an alternative technique, although I don't like it as much as the one we have showed you. But it's one of the techniques we were taught in the body.
Yeah, that's a good one. And we'll demonstrate that in greater detail in September, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So,
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on. All right, so next is what? Belly. Okay, so many times, like the belly area is an area where we energetically can hold a lot of emotions. So a lot of times people will feel tension there. Sometimes they might feel nausea. Very occasionally they might even throw up during a session. And that's why you always have the bags available, and if you need them. So if a person has a feeling in their belly, so let's just say it's tension, you would ask them, where is it? And then they would kind of point out the area. And it can either be like a little spot or it can be more of a general thing. But if it's a general thing, but again, the belly is a bit sensitive, so you want to be careful. You just, kind of put your hand there and have them place your hand, and then just hold it and have them push against you. And again, you want to be very careful here not to give them extra pressure. You just meet their pressure because it's usually not a lot of pressure.
Sometimes the breather put their own hands to give herself or himself a more pressure, and
they'll do that if they need it. And if they actually say like they feel like they're going to throw up, then you just say that's fine. It's a great release or whatever, and then you just support them. You can get the little bag, and you sit them up and just say breathe into it. If it needs to happen, just let it happen. Or you can put them on their side or whatever.
Yes.
Sometimes they'll be leaning forward like that, and you just make sure that they know it's okay, basically. And I'd say 80% of the time they don't actually throw up. It's more like just this kind of energetic dry heaving, but occasionally they might. And it's okay, it happens.
And then some people start spitting
Yeah.
a lot. So you can just have the tissue like here and then, yeah. And a lot of people start coughing, they just move to like this type of position.
Yeah, and then you can just kind of put your hand on their shoulder just to support them, make them feel
and
supported.
then put the bag in front, and then the tissue between you and a breather. You can either hand it to it, or just a lot of people start spitting. They just use Kleenex. Yeah, a lot. Yeah, that's in a sense like a breather find it's more comfortable for her, for herself to have a control.
I just want to make one comment, and that is that, this is the reason why we structure this the way we do in terms of our certification, of just really certifying you for one-on-ones or one-on-twos at the beginning, because this type of work, it's important to know when you do in-person sessions, especially larger groups, when there's a much higher probability that something like this is going to come up, in order to allow the person to leave and really, complete their process for them. And it's much easier after you actually get some practice on it, and again, we're just going over like a piece of it here, because a lot of it, like, you need extra people, you need, and it's very different getting practice yourself for a week than it is just kind of doing a demo. So, that's the reason why we do insist that there is this final week if you want to do a lot of people in person. So not just for this, but just in general, so you get experience that we give you feedback where you're walking around the room with larger groups, really getting a sense of when you dive in, when you don't dive in. So for in-person sessions, the last week is really important.
Yeah, and I'll just climb on that and add to that. When you're in person, let's say you have a group of even 12, you might be needing to do body work with somebody, but meanwhile, the music, you're in between, the music might be close to ending and it needs to be turned off, or then somebody else might be needing to go to the bathroom and is looking for somebody to help them get there, and then somebody else raises their hand and they're in some pain and they need some help. I mean, it's a lot to hold the space for all that. Obviously, you need support when you do groups, like when you start bringing in more people. In fact, I probably wouldn't even, until you really feel comfortable doing this work, I would probably start with in person. If you're by yourself, I wouldn't do more than one or two. So that's partly where this comes from. The most important thing with the body work is just trusting the breathwork process and trusting that they have an inner guiding intelligence. It's really about the most important thing. It's not like having to remember all the subtle details. It's important to do that. But the most important thing is just learning to be attuned to what is happening with the energy in that person's, what they're doing, what's happening with them. Like, I'll give you one example. If somebody is leaning away, like, their body language says so much. And so we'll go into it more next week, but basically it's a practice of learning to be present with what's happening with the person and what their body language is telling you and what they're saying.